Recording
There
in
you go.
progress. That's my kind of power,
I
Danny.
know your power.
This time, we ask that you turn off your portable electronic devices or turn them to airplane
I'm excited today to have our guest, Dany Assaf, who is a very high profile competition lawyer at Tories, co chair of the firm's competition and foreign investment review practice, because you have nothing to do, Dany, at all, as well as your day job of advising clients internationally and domestic clients on all of the above. You're also the author of your first book, Say Please and Thank You and Stand in Line, One Man's Story of What Makes Canada Special, which is near and dear to my heart, and how to keep it that way, as well as you are fluent in English and Arabic. So welcome to the podcast, Dany.
A pleasure to be here with you, Leanne. Thank you.
We usually like to start with an icebreaker or two,
Hmm.
just so
Sounds
that people
good.
can get to know you a little bit.
Sounds good.
So, your first icebreaker question is, if you could live in any sitcom,
Hmm.
which one would it be?
I would live in Seinfeld. I just think it is a series that was just a brilliant insight into everyday life and the things that we all think only happen to us, but are really universal experiences. And I just think it's brilliant of how comedy can bring us all together, regardless of our background, our faith, where we come from, what city we live in. We could see through the lives of others these little day to day episodes that we can relate to. And through that, we see one another in one another and laugh and be able to laugh. That would be that would be the sitcom I would like to live in.
Yeah, I I somehow knew that. It was one of my choices, but for sure. No, and it's a show about nothing, right? So, and which means life.
Well, life, we use the word nothing as a euphemism when we're talking about that show because we know life is a whole bunch of series of days put together that we have to make the most of. So if we wait around and we just think success in life is when we win the lottery or get a new job or get married or these monumental events, that's like a lot of time between big things. So what are you going to enjoy in the meantime? So that's why it's neat. Like every day, find these little victories of life, things that you enjoy, a conversation, a friendship, a cup of coffee. You see a beautiful flower, like they say, stop and smell the roses. Those little things keep us going between those big events. And they also help soften the fall when big events aren't good, because they always give us things sort of within our control that we can choose to enjoy because they're not that hard to access. It's not that hard to reach out to a friend. It's not that hard to go out for a nice meal. It's not that hard to go for a walk and breathe in some fresh air. Those are things that we can control. And if we see the beauty and the joy in them, every day can be fun and offer something rewarding for all of us and fulfilling. And that's why, many times you see life through children's eyes. We have that saying, you see life through children's eyes, because they're unjaded. And it is every day for them is an exploration. You watch them when they enjoy their first bowl of ice cream, or when they see the water, when you take them to swim and they look out at an ocean or a sea, you see their wonder in their eyes. That is a pure human experience and a pure human reaction to simple, beautiful things around us. So that's why when we say nothing, what we really mean is these are the things that make up everyday life. And if we choose to see them in a way that offers us something beautiful and rewarding, it makes each one of those days a little bit more fun.
Exactly. And if you're Elaine, joy is a big salad, right?
There you go.
Okay. We have I have one more before we get into the story behind what started Dany going.
Mm.
Um,
I'm interested to hear what got me going. I'm still not sure, but let's give it a shot.
This is an easy one.
Okay.
What
I can
emoji
believe
best describes you? Because when I think of you, Dany, I don't think of an emoji. So that's why I have to know what you think.
is
Which
there an
emoji you
emoji for
think?
like a strong wind or a hurricane or a tornado?
There's a little emoji wind.
That would be it.
That's perfect, actually. Actually, that wind emoji is new.
Oh, is that there you go. So
So
it's fresh. There you
it's
go.
fresh. It's a fresh
Come close.
emoji.
There
You're
we
right.
go. Yeah.
When we first started talking, we talked about, sort of the process for thought leadership, and it was probably the most enjoyable discovery session and initial call we've ever had with anybody, because you're a
Thank you.
great storyteller. But it, we, at the end of the day, we started to talk about your platform, which was very clear that it was, really about the power of ideas and um, unity, diversity, peace, and prosperity, and to put those all together, and it really starts with the book. I think. Well, it probably started with Fast and the Six, but
Mhm.
let's talk about how that your passion sort of built to where you and your wife decided to do Fast and the Six, and then when you decided to write a book. How did
Mhm.
that all come about?
Well, it came about, I think, through something we're all familiar with, which is we love our community, we love our country, and we love to see the future even brighter for us and our kids. So I think that's common across all of us, no matter who we are, where we come from. And then you live life, and it's this journey, and it's got all kinds of episodes to it. And sometimes you see the things you love in jeopardy or potentially at risk, and you want to save them, you want to preserve them, and if you can, you want to try to push them in the right way for this bright future for everybody. So you want to resist that. You want to resist that. And you think from there, well, what do I know? What can I do? Can I bake a cake? Can I argue a case? Can I drive somewhere? Can I deliver something? What is it I know that I can do? And for us, it really was two things. Firstly, the opportunity to host and to show that common hospitality for one another. Just have everybody over for dinner. Simple as that. And the second thing is, I'm a lawyer and words are my life. So I use words to try to resist these not so great things. So Fast and the Six really came from watching how our politics here in the US and other places just started to get very sharp, divided, dark, backward looking in many ways that we felt was going to divide us, that we weren't going to get any richer, spending the next 25 years tearing one another down instead of building everything we have up. That ain't going to give us that prosperity we're looking for. It ain't going to make things more certain. And it isn't going to give us the peace and the joy that we all want to have in this short life. So we thought, in the midst of all of this, can we have everybody over for dinner? And our yard wasn't big enough. And it happened to be around the time of the Muslim month of fasting, Ramadan, which fasting is a common experience across so many religions and so many cultures. We all identify with it. It may come from a little bit of a different tradition or a different story or a different purpose, even fasting just, for health reasons. But it's a familiar practice that we can all identify with. And then, of course, when you break your fast, who likes to eat alone? I mean, not a lot of people like to eat alone, if anyone. So you like to have people with you when you break bread. Again, a tradition as old as humanity. So we thought through this tradition, let's bring everybody for dinner. And of course, our yard and our house ain't big enough for everyone. And we asked some beautiful people, including the Mayor of Toronto, John Tory, and so many other Canadians of every background and faith, help us host this thing on our city square, Nathan Phillips Square. And that really was Lisa, my wife, and I attribute most of the good things that I do to her support and partnership, as well as my family and my parents. And we had this dinner really on Nathan Phillips Square. We called it Fast and the Six because it was to break fast and during the month of Ramadan. And our motto was diversity, unity, prosperity. Bringing all those things together, playing to our strengths, which is what Canada's all about, where when many become one to seek greater prosperity and peace in our lives. Now, we're imperfect. We've made so many mistakes. But again, we don't have to burn down our history to build our future. Every generation is to perfect. If I saw my father or my grandfather doing something wrong, I can throw that aside, focus on what is it that they did that was good, that brought me here, and make it better and build on it. I can look at it objectively in that way, with still with love, and say, and forgiveness, and say they didn't know, or they made an error, or even if it's worse, all we have is tomorrow. We can't reinvent yesterday. We seek justice and redress for yesterday, but we always want to go forward and to progress. So that was Fast in the Six, and to really have a party. So I call it the Muslim version of the Santa Claus parade. You don't have to be Christian to love candy canes and Santa Claus. You just have to be human. Who doesn't like Santa Claus and candy canes? And no one asks you your religion to go and enjoy that. So we wanted to add a Muslim tradition to that spirit and to that idea, and have Fast in the Six. And it's been a success ever since we started holding it, and it brings thousands of people to Nathan Phillips Square. And we're hoping to have it again, the live version of it this year, and bring people together to celebrate our diversity as one, and to know that we can see one another and all of us as potential allies, rather than the certain enemies that some people want to portray us as.
And it
And then
was
there's the book after that.
thousands of diverse people, right, Dany? Like,
Every background,
yeah.
every background. You could just look out and you see the faces of Toronto. You don't have to be a sociologist to know when you go there, you look out and you say, that crowd looks like Toronto, and it looks like Canada. And everybody here is here to enjoy one another's company and that spirit of connectedness.
Yeah, I love that. And then following on Fast in the Six,
Mhm.
you decided to sit down and write a book.
Yeah.
So what was the prompt? Because I mean, it's not like you sit around every day with nothing to do, Dany.
Yeah. So like everyone, we have passions, right? We have things we do that we enjoy. And that's one of my passions, is to write, and the power of storytelling and the power of words. Because no matter what, uh, as humanity, we tell stories. And those stories shape our lives and shape our days, and they shape our societies. Laws, in a way, are a narrative as well. Because at the end of the day, those words shape who we are and what we do. And it's a combination of things. But first, you have to start from a narrative. Who am I? And what is this? What's the purpose? All of us start, whether it's a person, a company, a country, it's the same thing, or a family. So for us, those words shape our narrative. And then when you have a narrative, that's the filter through which you interpret events. If you have one narrative, you can see things in a certain way. And if you have another narrative, you see things in a different way, right? Because it's your frame of reference, it's your expectation. So if you see something, it means different things to you. Like I tell people all the time, you can give somebody a gift, right? Same act, but depending on how that person perceives you, that gift can be insulting, or it could be something that is honored by you. Same act, but that person is giving you a gift that is somehow to humiliate you or to expose a shortcoming of yours. Whereas if it's somebody you trust and you like and they give you anything, what do you say? Oh my God, thank you so much. So I always, when I talk about these things, often I try to give like some example in our head of how we interact with one another and why our perceptions of one another are important. So if you mistrust somebody and they tell you 2 + 2 is 4, you'll pull out your calculator and you just check, right? I'm just going to double check because I don't trust this kid. If you trust and love somebody and they tell you 2 + 2 is 5, I bet you'll check. You know what you're going to check? You just want to check and see, maybe they're right. because you love them and you trust them. You'll give them the benefit of the doubt. You'll pull out your calculator, you'll double check, and you'll go, you know what, I just wanted to see, maybe they were right, I missed something. It all depends. And that's the function of narratives and storytelling, is how we see one another and how we interpret, how we interact with one another. And it softens the edges of things when they go wrong, and it accentuates the beauty of things when they go right, so that we value them more and don't take them as much for granted. So when we tell ourselves that our history and our story, although imperfect, always a work in progress, which I've seen in my own life and in my own family, we'll talk about that it is a common cause that we have in Canada, a common cause where many can become one to seek peace and prosperity in our lifetimes. If we believe that, and we focus and emphasize that part of our story and our heritage, then our hearts will be more open, our eyes will be more open, and our minds will be more open to always include the other. To always include the other, because we know somebody did it for us, and we pay it forward, and somebody will do it for our kids, and someone will do it for us. And over time, we'll get better at it. We'll get better at it. And as we realize, we left these folks out, and it was horrible, or worse, that we've done to some. And we learn from our mistakes because we always reinforce our common cause, and we will be more peaceful and more prosperous, all of us, if we pursue this unity in our diversity.
How did being a competition lawyer and dealing internationally shape a lot of the stories that you tell now? How did that shape your perception, and how did that help shape how you view your history and Canadian history and our common history?
That's a great question. So on the competition law side, it's very simple. It's really about studying the incentives and the disincentives for why we do things. And it starts with in a marketplace. Why do people buy apples and not oranges? Why do people buy apples from these folks and not other folks? Why do these people produce more apples than other people? What are all the dynamics? Because when you strip it all away, when you look at businesses or industries or companies, what can they really do different? They can invent something, and that happens. But often you look at any company or group of companies, they're not dumb. They have workers, they have equipment, they pay people. There's only so much that you can change. But why do some people go to work every day in this place and they make 100 widgets? And some people go to another place, same equipment, same everything, they make 110 in a day. What makes them think, you know what, I just want to try a little harder, take a little more pride in what I do? What makes them do that? Because they feel there's something that is a common cause. And then when you see how that plays out, you see how things can get enriched and how you can, in that way, almost make something out of nothing, because you have more using the same. So that is really important. And then interpreting, what is it that makes people do that? And it is this freedom. Competition is about freedom, that we have choice, that people can participate, that I know if I do this poorly or not to the best of my ability, someone else will come and do it better. That's not a bad thing. That pushes us all, because me too, I'm like everybody else. I love to sit on my couch and watch Netflix and watch these great shows 100%. And by the way, there's a lot to be said about that, because it's fun, it's enjoyable, and it is something you can learn from. But also, what makes me get up off of this couch and do other things? Because we have a passion, we feel we have a skill, and we also feel like we want to leave something good behind, and that we all compete in that. And that when we do that, somebody might say, you know what, good job. And then you might get rewarded for that. That's so essential to our human sense of self-worth. There's no one who likes to do something and not hear, well done, and get a reward. That's the whole beauty of a free society. And a life of freedom is that each one of us is like a little seed in a garden. We all get planted, And there's no limit to how big we can grow. Nobody says, you know what, we're going to put you in a box. You can only be 3 feet tall or 2 feet wide, or you can only bloom 3 flowers. I may never become, 10 feet tall and bloom 85. I know, but the belief that I can do that it's open to me, that's really rewarding, and it's motivational, and it's beautiful, because we all know it's the journey, not the destination.
Yep.
So that's the competition, just opened my eyes to how those things play out in our social lives, how we look at one another, how we structure our society, how we make sure we include everybody, because you get those best outcomes when everybody can play. If you put a team out there, and they're like a hockey team, and you put 6 people out there, and you put a restraint on one of your players, how are you going to win? The whole bench, everybody has to be allowed to unleash the most of their potential when they get onto the ice. So that's where that competition experience opened my eyes, to be able to say these principles apply in politics too. You always need competition between the parties and between ideas, because we all think it's stale out there. It's not fresh. People are talking about the same things. We feel the same thing. We always want that new blood being pumped into this marketplace of ideas. And in the end, as humans, with this gift of the mind and this gift of the heart, it's all about ideas. It's all about ideas. Everything we have, everything we will have, is about the best ideas being able to get out into the world, and us to find and to promote those best ideas to make our lives better, more prosperous, and more peaceful. That's all we have as thinking creatures. Now, on the international, it's very simple, like everybody else. When you go around the world, you learn. That's number one. Number two, you respect. You go and see things, even things you may not think are for me. At least it shows you a window into the lives of others. And it gives you at least a window or an opportunity to say, those people are not all crazy. They eat a lot of bananas, even though I hate bananas, because it makes sense in their world, right? They just grow a lot of bananas there. So they make banana pie, and they make, banana salad, and because it's in their lives. So I don't have to say that's dumb, because I went there to see where it came from.
Yeah.
Now, of course, like all humanity, we all make mistakes. People will come to Canada and say, you made this mistake, or we go somewhere else and we think people made mistakes. But at least it allows us to have our heart is open for forgiveness, and to work together, to share ideas, to hopefully over time, all of us coming to the best outcomes, respecting our different places and positions in the world. So there is no such thing as perfection on earth. That's something called heaven, or whatever way you want to describe it. So our expectations have to be reasonable. So I always think, when I think of a path forward for us as humans, it's like not to perfection, because why do I have an expectation of that? It's that we are born into chaos and into uncertainty and into all kinds of madness. And we're trying to organize that chaos, uncertainty, and madness into something that is more organized and peaceful and certain. So we're working from the bottom up, not from the top down. So always have humility in what we do, because you can get caught up in something else. The road to hell is also paved with good intentions. You can try so hard for something good that you lose that humility, and then the ends justify the means. And then, I want peace in my society, so I did all kinds of horrible things to bring peace. It's just one of those human conditions where we always have to have a little bit of humility in what we do, and the right expectations, and just try to push things in a positive direction as much as we can. And really, that's all that's asked of us. That's all that's asked of us or required of us. And that is that little journey, and those little days along the way become a lot more fun and a lot more interesting and a lot more rewarding.
So true. And what a great answer. Dany, take us back to when we first talked to you, um, because I want to set the stage for how the game is already in play. The game of life is already in play. We have the roadmap. It's all in our history, and you know, nodding to history, not necessarily reliving it. But tell us about um, how your family started in Canada, because I love the story about your great
Yeah,
grand great grandfather.
that's right.
Yeah.
So it's a, it's a relatively familiar Canadian story, I think, in so many ways. My great grandfather came from Lebanon to Alberta in the 20s. They say 1927 he arrived in Canada. And he came from a farming village in Lebanon. And he came to Alberta because he had a cousin who had come to Alberta before him. And before him, other relatives had come in the late, maybe 1800s. And it's a great story of how they say they got to Alberta and what made them come. So, firstly, a part of it, I think, is just like in many cultures, and especially in Lebanese culture and history, they have ants in their pants, or you go back to the times of the Phoenicians and the boats. They are curious about the world. I don't know what happened. They just want to see what's out there, and there's lots of little examples of that. And then also about, again, storytelling and the power of storytelling. So one story that's related to me as to how they got to Alberta was through the history of these farmers taking their wares and their vegetables or whatever from the village to Beirut, which was an ancient port city and still a fantastic city, notwithstanding current politics and other things. A historic city and a beautiful city. And they would go and do that. And of course, by the time they got there and they sold whatever they could sell, there was like nightfall. They couldn't come back. So they would spend the night and they would talk to these other men basically on these ships, and they would tell stories of what they heard from the places they had been to and people that they had spoken to. So they say that at that time, they talked about a lot about the gold rush and that there was all these riches in North America, the gold rush. So that's the story that they tell as to why those first immigrants came from my family and their distant cousins was to try to cash in on the gold rush. By the time they got here, there was no gold, there was no rush, there was nothing. It was just Alberta, prairie, cold, snow, winter. And they're like, well, how do we get back? And they're like, well, getting back is hard. So you better figure something out. And they made do. And there's great stories about how they got into the fur trade and were merchants, and so many stories about even how they learned the languages of our First Nations and the indigenous communities and learned to communicate with them and talk with them and lived with them and became prominent in the fur trade and as merchants. My great grandfather was a merchant. He had a store in Edmonton, where they say City Hall is today, right in downtown Edmonton. And he had an amazing. They talk about his network and how he knew people and got to know everybody around him. This man who came in, he probably didn't know English when he got here, and he built this business. And then he brought my great uncle, and my great uncle settled in Lac La Biche, Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
And many Lebanese came to settle in Lac La Biche, Alberta, and they became mink farmers.
And can we just say that that's northern Alberta?
That is northern
In case people
Alberta.
don't know.
It is God's country up there. And they became mink ranchers. And I remember as a kid going up to the mink ranch and feeding the mink as a kid in the 70s. And that was life. So they just saw their environment around them and made the most of it. And it did. And then it opened up the door to my father then coming in the 60s. And this beautiful Canadian story and beautiful Canadian experience that has allowed my family to make the most of the Canadian promise. And it's something we hope to continue for future generations, especially today.
Now, the real story, I mean, I love the story how they they figured out how to communicate with the natives and Aboriginals and
Mhm.
indigenous people, um, to trade,
Yes.
because it was beneficial for both. But tell us about the first mosque.
Yeah. And again, another amazing Canadian story. So these people come in the early 1900s, and they work and they make peace with their surroundings and those around them. And then they want, like everyone else, you want to kind of solidify your place and space in your community. And for many, that is faith as well. It's normal. You want to build a place where you can practice your faith and worship and benefit from, again, that basic freedom of religion that we all strive to have, to believe what we want in our hearts and our minds. And they wanted to build a mosque. Of course, it was after the Depression, so there wasn't a lot of extra money and stuff, and everything was in the 30s, but it was important to the community to do that. So there was some really strong Lebanese Canadians at that time, and it was led by a woman. Her name is Helwi Hamdan, and her family, I'll talk about them later, was an integral part of the community, remains so, and very, very important to my family too. She led the way to this project, to build this mosque. So she organized the community. Beyond just the Muslim community too, she went to the mayor of Edmonton at the time, Mayor Fry, and to the Christian community and the Jewish community and all the others in Edmonton at the time to rally around building that mosque. And they did it. And it was truly the first little mosque on the prairie.
Amazing.
And everyone came together to let them have this place of worship. And what's amazing today is it's now in Fort Edmonton Park, this mosque built in 1938, the first mosque in Canada. And it was preserved, which an initiative also led by this woman, Helwi Hamdan, and her daughter and her granddaughter, decades later, to have this mosque placed in Fort Edmonton Park. And if you go and see it, it actually looks like the cross between a mosque and a Ukrainian Orthodox church in some ways. Because guess what? The contractor was Ukrainian Canadian. They reached out to him to build this mosque. And I'm sure, again, we're just guessing. He said, well, I could do this. I kind of have some plans. I've built churches and stuff. So I'll take this thing. What do you guys like? They said, well, we have minarets. So we could put some minarets and some arched windows and so on. And it became Canada's first mosque. And if you go look at it, when you look at it, you take a double take because it kind of looks like a cross between an Orthodox church and a mosque. And that, again, captures what is Canada. Many coming together in one common cause to make a place and a space for one another.
Which is hilarious to me, and I resonated with that because, of course, I'm Ukrainian with my great grandparents
Right.
settling in Saskatoon, in Saskatchewan. So it struck me as so funny. But until you talked about it kind of having components of a Ukrainian church,
Right.
I never thought about the similarities because
Yeah,
there are similarities, right?
there
Which
are.
is funny.
It's
But
beautiful.
and
It's
and
beautiful.
and I love the way you so eloquently tell the stories that were handed down. I don't think that if I told stories that were mine get a little bit sketchy somewhere between my grandmother and my dad, and then how it got to me. But and there's maybe a little bit more drama, but I feel like at the point they came to Ontario, it got a little bit sketchy, but I think that, you know, just as a point in history and so that people understand how harsh those winters were. And it wasn't like it was developed land they were starting in. Like we're talking northern Alberta and and especially where they had their mink farms, right? Like
So this family, Helwi Hamdan, the woman who championed the mosque, that family started in Fort Chipewyan, Alberta, as furriers and merchants. Talk about even more remote. in the early 1900s. And what's interesting is, I am sure they faced not only physical hardship with the conditions, there may have been people who didn't understand them, or I don't know, who didn't relate to them, or whatever it is. But you know what, the stories they chose to pass on to all of us were, the positive. Eyes wide open, things can happen. Don't be naive, don't be simplistic, but of course, there's always opportunity. There's always potential to make the most of yourself. So they chose, the stories I heard as a kid were all about positive. You can do it. Go ahead, build it, make it, see it. That's the narrative they chose. And I'm telling you, it was so inspiring and instilled so much confidence in me. It's just like when we have our kids, we try to inform them of the world, but each child is born with a spark. We have blessed with 4 kids, and everybody sees this. Children are born with a spark. I call it like a pilot light almost.
Yeah.
It's on, and it's heating, and it is animating. And then you'll go through life. There will be events and people who will try to put that spark out. But try to put that spark out. What do we do with our kids? We always want to reignite that spark, preserve that spark, and make sure it's always burning inside them to make the most of their lives and their passion and their potential. That's where storytelling comes in. It's not that we don't know. It's not that we're unaware. It's not that tomorrow something terrible could befall any one of us. Of course it can. But why live our lives defined by that possibility? No one is going to give us this day back. They're not going to say you can have that day back. So we have a choice in that. Again, informed, aware, eyes wide open of how we want to see our future, and to tell ourselves the story that will continue to motivate us through even those dips and dark times.
Yeah, it's true. And that's why I want to keep coming back to the power of ideas to create a better tomorrow and having those conversations. And you said something very powerful to me about discrimination and racism and things that happened in the past. All of the horrible things that we've just found out about that happened out west with the Aboriginal children.
When you're faced with these things, the first thing is, don't let anyone ever define you. No one can define you. No one knows your self-worth better than you do, and don't let anybody tell you you're not worth who you are. Number 2, have always an open heart to forgive, because there's a lot of energy in anger. There's a lot more power in forgiveness. So that is what propels us, because we want to live for tomorrow while fighting for the justice of the past. Also, as we fight for a better tomorrow, to insist on justice for the harms of the past and to correct those past, but not to let it define us.
Right.
Because then we will be trapped in that world. We're letting those horrible crimes and those horrible episodes that were inexcusable, that were heinous, and that were dark, then define our future.
Yeah.
So for me and my family, there was a point after 9/11 that, in spite of all of this history and this lived experience of truly belonging in this Canadian mosaic, that people questioned whether we belonged in Canada. And somebody, and I write this in the book, a neighbor put up a sign pointing towards my parents' house saying, "Osama bin Laden lives closer than you think." I mean, we couldn't even fathom where that comes from. We still don't even understand. But the idea that this horrendous crime committed by these criminals and terrorists,
Yeah.
that took all these innocent lives, somehow now questioned my place in space in Canada. That made me see what many of us see, which is a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. That if one of us is vulnerable, we're all vulnerable. That there is no such thing as the other. There's only us. And our future, especially as the world gets smaller and shrinks and more competitive, is for all these 38 million souls in Canada to be on the same team and rowing in the same direction. How is it that this nation, our nation, is going to maintain this quality of life and this opportunity if we are divided and pitted against one another? The math doesn't even work. There are 7 or 8 billion people in the world. How are you going to keep up and to be able to give our kids the future that we enjoyed ourselves? There's no way. So this has always got to be a country where who you are never determines what you can be. And when we think of these crimes that were committed against Indigenous children and families, and I go back to what we were robbed of, these souls were taken from us. They never had an opportunity. What could they have been? What could they have contributed? How much richer could we be in many ways if we hadn't lost them? And when we look at that example, and we look around today and we think, are there versions of that that are still happening to them? And then there are versions of that happening to others? And how do we benefit? And then we think about our own self-interest in a way, getting back to making a future that is brighter even than the past. And people say, well, the way it is humans are tribal, and this is some survival skill. And then even there, I say, okay, let's say we are tribal, and being tribal is about surviving. Well, how do you find your tribe today? Who is our tribe today when you're thinking about how you're going to seek a more prosperous and peaceful future? And you look at the problems we're facing. Isn't it, whether it's climate change, security, a virus, economic opportunity, who your children are going to bring for dinner and may be their life partner? You can't be so certain who that's going to be.
How do you deal with a neighbor that does things like that? How do you deal with hatred against yourself? Like, do you ignore it? What do you do?
Yeah. So I think firstly, you don't ignore it. And if somebody is actually trying to harm you or harm your life or harm your family, fortunately, we have tools in this country to address that. So yes, whether it's you call the police, whether it's you launch a lawsuit, whether you advocate for an inquiry, that has to stop. We have in law, they have a saying, your rights stop where my nose begins.
Yeah.
We all have to respect one another and be respected. And that's actually back to my book and the title, Say Please and Thank You and Stand in Line.
Yeah.
Well, my father, when he came in 1965, was introduced to a man named Munir Hamdan, who happened to be the son of the woman, Hilwi Hamdan, who championed the first mosque. They were a very successful, prominent family. My father was blessed to meet them when he came to Canada. And this man, who's still alive, he's a youthful 94 years old and still inspires me, told my father, I know you come from Lebanon, you're very proud of your heritage, you're very proud of your background, and you should remain so. And it's good, because it's who you are, it's part of your identity. But also remember, in Canada, here, like any other relationship, it's a two-way street. Remember that people always say please and thank you and stand in line. So that's always been poetic to me and so symbolic of what Canada is, because it represents a few things. Firstly, it's just a really civilized way to live if we all say please and thank you and stand in line for one another. Secondly, it shows people who do that for one another, it means regardless of rank, name, and serial number, whatever it is, we all respect and expect to equally be respected, that everybody is equal on that level. And that's the foundation of a society of equality. And thirdly, it is such an inclusive membership criteria. And while being meaningful. That no matter who you are and where you come from, no matter what your religion, your background, your history, everybody can say please and thank you and stand in line for one another and never compromise one bit of their authentic self and their authentic identity. It's very, very powerful. And for me, that is really important when you're dealing with these situations, is to remember that fundamentally your place in space is secured in Canada. And no one can take that away from you ever, no matter how loud they scream, no matter what they do. So the second part is always to remain confident and certain in your place in space and your fundamental equality in this country. And then from there, to stay focused on the things that are going to allow you to make the most of your potential and your passions. Don't let anyone distract you from that. So rectify and seek redress all that we're entitled to and all that is right and just. Never allow anyone to take the confidence and the security of your place in space in our country. And number three, stay focused on the passions and your ability to make the most of your life. Those are the things that we all, I think, put in the mix to make sure that we can survive even these dark episodes.
Yeah, and because I'm thinking about all that is out there on social media, Dany, and all of the people that are experiencing injustices, and so I wanted to get it from your mouth to their ears, hopefully through this and then your videos that will be coming up, because it's so it's it's so you've been through it, so you can say with, I mean, nobody says it like you do. So thank you for that. Um, and it's such a, it feels heavy to me, like that whole topic feels so heavy, and it is. I mean, it's serious, but I think if we all continue to step forward with, thinking about a positive future with love in our hearts and loving one another. I think I first said to you, one of our first conversations was, it's it hurts my heart to see any kind of racism, discrimination, because for me, I just look at us as, I see us as energy. I mean, this is just our shell, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's like we all have different shells, but and we all have different experiences, but we're all this energy. And at the end of the day, our energy is the same energy. So,
It is. It
unless
is.
you're a negative energy, in which case, you know what happens to negative and positive,
I
right?
know. I know. Well, it's interesting you say that. When we look at the things that are important to us and about that energy, it's fascinating how life is kind of structured just in a very basic way.
Yep.
So we are all emotional. Every human being is emotional. No matter how, like you said, there's a shell. There's a saying, still waters run deep. That's because everyone has emotion.
Yep.
Don't care. No, there's no such thing. This person's unemotional. I hear that. A person shows no emotion. No such thing. Don't ever believe it. Everyone has emotion. And then we think of the most valuable emotion. There are lots. And as I said earlier, there's a ton of energy in anger, but there's a lot of power in forgiveness, just
Yep.
as a guiding light. And I get angry. We all get angry. It's okay. It's very human. But just to remember, I just come back to that. There's a lot of energy in anger. There's more power in forgiveness. And then you think about emotions that are the most rewarding and the most compelling. And love is at the top of that list, that's for sure. And then you think of how this most precious thing is unlimited. And for me, I was reminded of that with my kids. So you have one child and you love them intensely, intensely. And you can't help but think, maybe I'm weird, I don't know. But when I had the second one, I'm like, am I going to love the second one as much as the first one? Because I'm infatuated with the first one. Like, How it like really like I'm gonna say that to people when they ask me. Like I'm like, yeah, I love them equally. Then you have a second child, you're like, oh my God, how much do I love this kid? And then we had a third, and I'm like, oh my God. And then I had a fourth, and and then I realized, guess what? The most precious thing in life is unlimited to everybody, whether you're rich, whether you're poor, whether you're black, white, brown, green, doesn't matter what. This thing is there for you in unlimited quantities. That's kind of cool. It's kind of like the leveler of life, because that spirit of all of us gets rewarded and nourished most intensely by this most powerful emotion that you're not born saying you can only have 5 units of love or 10 units of love. It's unlimited in time and amount. It's kind of neat. So that's another thing that kind of keeps me positive when things don't go so well. I'm like, you know what? Is there something I could love? Including I love food. So I'm always like, hey, I'll have another burger. I love a burger. That makes me feel good. I love a chicken wing. I love a steak. I'll go for that too. There's a lot of things I love. Sometimes I love them too much, so it's too much of a good thing too. So I got to keep that in balance. And when I forget, my kids remind me. They're like, Dad, holy man, you're out of shape. Dad, you're fat. Which is another good thing about kids. They keep it real. I tell a story just quickly about humility and how kids, you grow and you learn and they remind you. So one time I came from the office, I don't know, something great happened, like professionally. I don't know, I got something or whatever. Something good happened, an award or something, and I couldn't wait to get home to tell my family. Like I was so excited and proud. So I get the door, I walk in, and I literally, before I could say anything, my daughter, Hannah, my youngest, this precious little girl, runs up to me. She may be 3, 4, I don't remember. And she's like, Daddy, 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 like something urgent. And I'm like, what, sweetheart? She said, I lost Barbie's shoe. I'm like, you lost Barbie's shoe. So right away, it's like agenda shift. Like, you're not talking about this. So congratulations, no one wants to hear it. We got to find Barbie's shoe. Okay, let's start the hunt. Where do you think we could find Barbie's shoe? Oh, it gets better. In Mummy's truck. Excuse me? In Mummy's truck. I'm wearing like my best suit, everything like that. Mummy's truck. Where? Oh, come with me. She takes my hand, this little hand, takes my hand, walks me back outside, by the way. So first thing, I'm kicked out of the house, essentially. So into the truck. And where is it? Oh, it's not in the front seat. Oh, it's in the 3rd row. I'm like, 3rd row? No one goes to the 3rd row because it's scary back. Like fries, burgers, gum. I'm like, you're kidding me. She says, I think it fell under the seat in the 3rd row. Excuse me, under the seat in the 3rd row. So now, from being on the top of the world, right? Because fate is beautiful. I'm literally on my hands and knees in crumbs, cookies, French fries,
Everything goes to the back.
wrappers, in my best suit to find Barbie's shoe. And the other irony is, you know how big Barbie's shoe is?
Yeah.
It's about that big.
I know.
That big.
I know.
Just to emphasize that how small I had the meal to find this thing. When I found Barbie's shoe, and I didn't tell my story. But it was a good night. We got Barbie's shoe.
Kids have a way of doing that, right? Changing your priorities.
They keep it real.
They
keep
do.
It real. But that happens with all friendships, all relationships. We all have similar experiences. And that was one that reminded me of my place, that's for sure.
Although sometimes it's our grandparents, I think, or our parents, because you also have a saying.
So what's beautiful is, in life, when we think of purpose and why we do things and what the impact is going to be, we often have these plans in our head, right? That we're going to do this and we're going to conquer this and we're going to seek that and we're going to attain this. And the Lebanese have a beautiful saying that when they let you, tell a story. You say, I'm going to go here and I'm going to do this and I'm going to get that. I'm going to do this. And then they ask you at the end of the okay, so after you do all of that, they say ba'dain. And what ba'dain means, then what?
Yeah.
What happens the day after you've controlled everything and you've amassed all of this and all of that stuff? What happens? And you know, it's amazing how often that stumps people. They're like,
Exactly.
I don't know. I'm like, well, but then after that, then what do you do? They're like, I don't know. I haven't thought about that. So it's just a great discipline of, and what's the point of all of that?
Yeah.
Beyond attaining that, what are you going to do with that position? What are you going to do with that wealth? What are you going to do with this property? What are you going to do with it? Is it
Yeah.
just for the sake of it? If it's for the sake of it, you won't find meaning in it. You won't find enduring meaning in it. And you will feel some emptiness that you didn't make the most of that thing and that opportunity. You remind me of sayings of mothers. I say, Mom, I want to go do this. I want to go here. I want to do this. I want to do that. She thought it was too dangerous. She would always say, better you cry a day than I cry a lifetime. I was like, I mean, that's pretty good. I'm like, wow, she's kind of, I mean, who can argue with that logic?
Yeah. You know, it's that worry thing,
Yeah,
right? Yeah. So better you pout and cry for a day than me worrying because I let you go and
God forbid.
ruined our
Yeah.
lives because you died or something, right? Like,
God forbid. God forbid. Yeah. So
so
lots of
okay,
great lessons from parents and grandparents. There's no doubt.
okay, Danny, I want to ask you another what
Yes.
if you ran the world,
Oh,
what is one thing that you would change? First thing you just because we talked about
yeah.
Badin and
Yeah.
what now and doing all these things, if you ran the world, and of all of the people I know, you would
Yeah.
be most likely to do that
Oh
if
God.
there were one person.
Oh God.
What would be the first and the one thing right off the bat? If you got one free, what would be that one thing?
Yeah. Firstly, God help the world if that ever came to pass. So
Danny, I'd help you.
this
It's
is
okay.
totally fictional. Totally
I
fictional.
I totally help you.
But the one thing would be that we all see one another in ourselves.
Mm.
That would be the one thing, our common humanity. To come back to that, to make it crystal clear that there is no us and there's no them. It's just we on this very small planet for a limited period of time. That would be the fundamental mind shift that I would love to bring to everybody and to remind myself first as well. Because from there is that sense of equality and opportunity that opens up that brightest future. Because the way things are and how complex the world is, we no longer have the luxury, and I say that with irony, to ignore one another.
Yeah.
There were generations in the past where you could maybe live your life without interacting with another country or another people. That was, again, a ironic luxury. There is no way that this planet will continue to sustain us all and to give us that essential beauty of realizing each and one of our human potential without being able to benefit from the potential of everyone around us and to see everyone as potential allies rather than certain enemies. We are all in this together, and genuinely to believe that in the 21st century, humanity is our tribe.
That's right. And so beautiful and well put, Danny. I have to ask you this. What piece of advice would you give um, probably your kids, Gen Z, your 18-year-old self
Yeah.
for what you know now?
The number one thing would be, and which I try to instill in my kids, is to never give up. There is nothing more important than resiliency. It's not a matter of if we will fail, it's a matter of when we will fail.
Right.
And to embrace that failure as an opportunity to learn and to grow and to become our better selves. That is, I think, the fundamental starting point to not letting life drag you down. And then from there, to always look for and to see the goodness in things and the beauty in things and to seek the beautiful things. because those are the things that will nourish our mind, body, and soul to make the most of every tomorrow. And how the greatest honor to another day of life is to make the most of that next day. That's how we genuinely honor the gift of life and of each additional day we have to live.
Do your kids listen to you?
No, absolutely not. So I'm glad to be doing this because maybe there's somebody out there that people listen. So let's give it a shot. Let's go give it a whirl and see what happens. And have
Danny,
some fun along the way.
you had one other great saying that I just want to say to end
Yeah.
this up, and that was about when you come to Canada or when you come to a new country.
Oh, yes. So another thing that's beautiful about this country and about fresh starts, is the beauty about Canada is when you get here, you're welcome to pick up your luggage, but please leave your baggage at home.
Exactly. Right? Isn't that perfect? But that is so true with everything in life. And a perfect way to end off today. So thank you, Dany. It was just, we could go on for another hour, but I know that you've probably got a million things to do.
A pleasure, always a pleasure, Leanne. Thank you for this time. Thank you for this opportunity. God bless. God bless our beautiful country, and God bless everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Dany.
Ladies and gentlemen,